So I do a lot of chimp strategies on this channel, and it kind of got me thinking, doing some strategies is thinking about what is the overall worst hero in BTD6. And as I was pondering that question, I've came to the realization I think Obyn is definitely the worst hero in BTD6 kind of overall, not just for chimps, but for pretty much every game mode. I can't really find a reason to use him over many other heroes. And the reason I find that he's the worst hero in BTD6 is simply just because he only has one strategy that it works well with, which is, Avatar Wrath plus Pop Lust. And that's really kind of about it. BTD6 is a game all about synergies and what towers work well together, which is, the kind of basis like, 2 towers chimps and all that. But, just kind of in general in gameplay, it's like figuring out, what towers work well together, what bounces off each other's weaknesses, what synergize well with each other, where can one tower succeed and pick up the slack where one tower, falls at. And Obyn really only synergizes with one strategy, which kind of makes him, he's bad simply just because he's not really that versatile enough to really kind of be useful in all strategies in play. Simply just because for early game you can't start with him anymore, so early game he not really as good as something like Quincy or Sada. Money generation with all the trees is laughable. I mean, it's a form, it's not really that great, but Benjamin does that better, and even Geraldo with his NFT also does that better. Late game, Obyn's not really that good late game. His main attack falls off heavily, and so his really main selling point is Wall of Trees at that point, with Wall of Trees at level 20 has over 9,000 RBE. But even then, that just ends up being kind of like a Spike Factory at home. Spike Balls just ends up doing that job, kind of a bit better. So really, you're only bringing Obyn just for the buffs that he gives to Druids, which is why he's bad, is that he only synergizes with Druid. And to be honest, when most people go Druid, they're really only going Avatar Wrath. Yes, sometimes people go Spirit of the Forest. Almost no one goes for Superstorm unless you're doing a challenge where you're trying to get Superstorm. So it's just kind of a bit unfortunate that, Ninja Kiwi has been doing a lot of buffs, but I feel like they've been kind of shelving Obyn as he doesn't do well. You don't really see him too often in kind of a lot of strategies unless, again, it's Avatar Wrath plus Pop Lust. That's the only strategy that Obyn really has going for him. So you think about it, like sure, people might argue, oh well, Azili's the worst hero, but I disagree just because Azili has a high skill ceiling, I kind of find with, timing mob hexes and all that. And after the buffs to where, Azili can now pop purples and her level 7, I think it's level 7, the totem, giving, extra pierce to wizards also does help out necros for the early game. Of course, this does kind of do an anti-synergy in the late game because, POD plus mob hex isn't really good synergies because you're not getting the Bloons spawns from mob class Bloons inside if you do use mob hex. So there's kind of anti-synergies there, there's an argument there. But for any other strategy, Azili works well. If you do get level 20 Azili, you basically don't have to worry about round 100 anymore. That round's basically free. And mob hex can be used to delete like half of 98 if you time the ability right. Let's look at Pat Fusty for example. With Pat Fusty, he synergizes really well with, fast attacking low damage towers like, Sun Avatar and Tack Zone and those strategies, and then, Pat Zone and Pat Sun Avatar is a really good strategy that you have just because, with Tack Zone, increasing the damage from, what is it, like 1, they changed it a while ago, so Tack Zone now does 1 damage and +1 to mob class balloons, but increasing the Tack Zone's damage from 1 to 2 is double damage to balloons, which is insane. And then, Sun Avatar is the same thing. It's more than double damage just because Sun Avatar shoots out 3 projectiles that do 1 damage. So really, you're kind of like tripling the damage there. And so Pat Sun Avatar and Pat Zone does really well. Gwendolyn did receive some nice buffs in the most recent update to where you can now first target the cocktail, which I like, as well as the fact of her buffing kind of D-breaths as well as Inferno Ring and Ring of Fire. That's also a pretty nice strategy. Although I will say Gwendolyn is probably the second worst hero just because again, she only synergizes well with kind of that, but she can be used, her level 10 can be used as kind of a mib skip if you really want to. Now, even if you compare Obyn to heroes that don't really do too much for buffing and instead are just pure DPS, like Churchill for example, or Quincy, Quincy is the early game king. You know, if you have tried out, you know, Muddy Puddle's chimps, you know, if you don't want to do a dart sniper start, you can just end up going for a Quincy start, which works out pretty well. For Churchill's case, Churchill is an absolute powerhouse and does absolutely incredible amounts of damage. I've beaten Corey chimps here, which is kind of Churchill as main DPS, and the rest was literally just invested into support. And it's not even kind of using them optimally. Like, you know, I was able to do Dark Castle chimps with Castle Master and Homeland, and that was thanks to Churchill, you know, carrying the sort of early game and mid game enough so that way I can actually afford those towers. Now, not to mention, you know, Churchill's Moa Barrage is also pretty good and helps out a lot against DT rounds, which is something I know a lot of new players may struggle with, is camo lead popping power. So Churchill 10 pretty much can be used for, like, you know, 90 and 93. 95 is too many DTs, so you're going to need a bit more there. 99 DTs have a bit too much health for Churchill, Small Barrage to take down, so you are going to need a bit of support there. But, you know, Churchill, again, even though he doesn't really buff anything, he enables you to do a whole lot with, you know, him being able to pop every single balloon type, as well as the fact that, you know, he's a powerhouse. You know, he does do so much damage that he can allow you to save up for those more expensive towers and do some more conventional strategies. You can use them to help save up for the mid game, or just kind of help carry the late game if you so wish. Obyn doesn't really do any of that. His main selling point really is early game. I feel like once round 40 is over, I don't feel like Obyn's really useful just because his main attack isn't really all that good, and, you know, you need to wait to get Wall of Trees. So until you get Wall of Trees, Obyn's just kind of useless. He's not really too helpful for the mid game. In late game, again, he's only there for buffing Avatar Wrath. Late game, his damage isn't that good. Brambles at that point is worthless, and again, his main selling point is Wall of Trees at that point, which again just end up turning into a Spike Factory at home, which I feel like something like Spike Balls or Permaspike would be so much better. Now, this isn't to say that, you know, Obyn's worthless, there's no use for him. That's not really true. All heroes do have their uses eventually. It's just that in Obyn's case, it's so very situational and niche that I kind of end up forgetting that Obyn's a hero that exists and just kind of opt out for a bunch of other heroes that I feel like would probably do better. And you could probably even make an argument for Avatar Wrath, not for Avatar Wrath, for Geraldo being better with, you know, Avatar Wrath strategies. Yeah, you do lose out on the buffs, but, you know, Geraldo basically has like 20 abilities that you can juggle to do pretty much anything you really want. So Geraldo kind of being a bit strong does kind of hurt Obyn just a little bit, just because Geraldo can synergize with literally anything. And Geraldo does kind of help out, you know, a bit more with the late game and mid game with, you know, Blade Trap, Genies, Pickles, all of that. You know, Geraldo doing pretty much everything. It kind of hurts Obyn in that, you know, he's so very niche. I feel like the best thing really about Obyn is really his buffs to kind of magic monkeys, which, if you don't know, he does give some extra pierce and range to magic monkeys, not as much as he does to druids, but he does help out magic monkeys kind of a little bit. But even with magic monkeys, I feel like the only one that's really useful is for like ninja. But Geraldo would be better just because sharpening stone and pickles does better buffs for ninja does than, you know, extra range and extra pierce. And even for wizards, you know, Geraldo I feel like is still better than Obyn when it comes to magic monkey buffing. So I mean, overall, it's kind of unfortunate that Obyn's kind of in the spot he is. I don't really feel like he's useful in many scenarios, and it just kind of feels like he's just kind of forgotten about. And he's a really cool hero. I do think there's a lot of potential here. There isn't a hero that specifically buffs magic monkeys, and Obyn's the best we got, but unfortunately just Geraldo is just so much better in every way that there's really no real reason to go for Obyn anymore. And it's just kind of unfortunate. Maybe they'll revert the change they did a while ago to where Obyn can't be started with, although I doubt they're going to do that. Or I feel like if NK kind of wants to balance Obyn and make Obyn just a little bit better, they definitely need to lean into more support for magic monkeys, as that's Obyn's main selling point. Druids I can understand, but the only issue with druids is that there's really only one path that's really kind of worthwhile for buffing, which is Avatar Wrath. You can go Spirit of the Forest, but for Spirit of the Forest, saving up for the mid game is a bit difficult, just because Jungle Bounty is not a good stepping stone into the Spirit of the Forest. So you could make an argument for other heroes to help carry the mid game to Spirit of the Forest, and just kind of missing out on those buffs from Obyn. which is understandable. So I'm not really sure what specifically Ninja Kiwi could do to make Obyn a little bit better, but I think the best option that Ninja Kiwi could take is to lean into those buffs for Magic Monkeys, because we don't have a hero that specifically buffs Magic Monkeys. Well, we don't really have heroes that kind of buff specific tower categories, but that's besides the point. I mean, I feel like Obyn could definitely be the first and one of the, not one of the best heroes, but definitely a strong contender for a really great hero if Ninja Kiwi just kind of leaned more into the buffs with Magic Monkeys. Druid buffs, I feel like, are great, but then again, the buffs that Obyn gives to Druids are either kind of meh or they're kind of great. Like, you know, extra damage to like Druid of the Storm doing extra damage to mob class Bloons, I feel like isn't really that much of a buff, simply just because who's using Druid of the Storm for mob damage, and why even going for Druid of the Storm in Chimps mode anyways? Or like in really any other game mode. The only time people go for Druid of the Storm is purely for like round 76 regrow farming, and even then that's only situational for bosses. So basically that's really it. Obyn's the worst hero purely just because he only synergizes with one strategy, and that's kind of it. He doesn't really do anything else besides kind of buffing Avatar Wrath. The other Druid paths I feel like aren't really kind of great with Obyn's buffs, as I do feel like there are heroes that could help better. For Superstorm, I don't think it's worth running Obyn at all, simply just because you'd want a hero to be able to carry you to be able to afford Superstorm anyways. And even if you aren't going in Chimps mode to even afford Superstorm, why would you want to bring Obyn to specifically buff Superstorm? If you can afford Superstorm in a regular game, you can probably afford pretty much anything. And for middle path, again, Jungle's Bounty is not a good stepping stone into Spirit of the Forest, so you want a hero to help carry you into Spirit of the Forest. And so really, Obyn really only buffs Avatar Wrath, and that is why I believe that Obyn Greenfoot is the worst hero in BTD6. It is a bit unfortunate. I do like his design. I think he's kind of cool, but it's just unfortunately I find that I don't really use him too often, simply just because I can't find a reason to bring him over many other heroes.